America, a nation that is viewed as perfect from the outside. But like all things, it wasn't always that way. American history has been filled with years of political corruption, economic drought, bloody wars, and almost tyrannical scrutiny and racism. But there have also been some very hopeful and joyous times with great leaders and a booming nation. With the history of America, massive events have occurred that led the country into becoming a stronger and better nation, be it something as great as JFK's presidency, or something as terrible as the September 11th terrorist attacks. These are the biggest events that changed America. Our first stop is back in the late 60s and early 70s, where a California senator was just elected into office as the US president. His name? Richard M. Nixon. As the years went by, Nixon had done some very great and impressive things in his presidency, such as calming relations with the USSR and Communist Russia, as well as quote-unquote ending the Vietnam War. But one action toppled his presidency: the Watergate scandal. Leaked papers from the Pentagon showed that Nixon had been secretly expanding the Vietnam War efforts, so he decided to bug the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel. When the Democrats found out about this, there were many to threaten Nixon with impeachment.
There was a break-in at the Democratic HQ. I thought nothing of it at the time. But when I then heard of Nixon's resignation and the impeachment efforts, I said that I was glad that Nixon was out of office because I did not want someone shady to be running the country. This is a newspaper clipping from the week about his resignation, and the reason I hold on to it is to remind myself that most politicians cannot be trusted, and they are only out for themselves. This event changed America because it showed that all presidents were not George Washington or John F. Kennedy.
Nixon's resignation shook America and caused everybody to watch future presidents in office like a hawk, so that something like Watergate would never happen again. Nixon's presidency was not the only illusion and facade that America had faced before. From today, it started almost 90 years ago, and several argue that we have yet still to recover from it: the Great Depression. America is booming. The 1920s had bode well for the economy, making America a thriving country. However, nothing is forever, so when the stock market crash came, people were shocked, but also were expecting something big to happen. The stock market crash happened on Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, or commonly now known as Black Tuesday. 16 million shares were exchanged that day because of a complete collapse in the market, which resulted in billions of dollars being lost.
Living in the Great Depression was hard and taxing for everyone. But the day that was easily the hardest was Black Tuesday. I was not at the stock exchange, but when I heard what happened, I quickly rushed to a nearby bank because I had stock invested. When I got there, there was a massive line of people already waiting. The bank made a statement saying that they lost a great deal of money and could not give us our withdrawals. Back then, I was a political cartoonist, and I drew several about the Great Depression. I've kept this specific sketch of one that I did not finish because the bank failure impacted me tremendously.
Not just America was affected by the Great Depression. Many other countries did as well. America would stay in this condition for a decade until a little conflict called World War II would pull us out. The Great Depression was a catalyst in showing how damaging an event can hurt America physically. but an event can severely damage how the world views them. Today, most people will say that the smallest action that any country makes will be seen as controversial. But back in 1898, America made a very controversial move and initiated the Spanish-American War. Cuba was in a spot very similar to what America was in long ago. They wanted independence from their home country. Like America before with France, Cuba asked America for help. Most Americans were all for this, but the event that made us officially declare war on Spain was the sinking of the USS Maine. February 15th, 1898, an explosion of unknown origin sinks the USS Maine in the Cuban Havana harbor. More than half of the 400 U.S. crew members were killed in the explosion. The American ship was in a Cuban harbor to protect any American citizens after a rebellion against the Cuban government occurred.
I was an American citizen living in Cuba at the start of the war. I still remember the day when the USS Maine sunk. I visibly saw the explosion and the ship sinking. At the time I did not know what it was that sunk the Maine. Initially I thought it was the Spanish, like the US, and if that was the case, I knew that America was not going to be very happy. I found a piece of the ship's hull along the beach a couple of hours later, and decided to keep it. I knew that these were going to be my last days in Cuba, so I thought of it as a going-away present.
By the end of the quote-unquote war, all of Spain's colonies were captured by America. Unfortunately, America made the decision to keep the colonies for themselves and did not give them independence like Cuba originally intended. America, for the time being, had become the imperialist power they never wanted to be. Quite possibly the worst tragedy in America had begun at its conception as colonies. Even though political corruption, economic drought, and warfare are brutal, they did not single out and blatantly torture a single minority group. Slavery did that. Even as slavery was outlawed, African Americans were being treated very poorly in the South. Being segregated on a daily basis and not being treated like human beings was very taxing on them, and being able to do nothing about it was even more frustrating. While some people resorted to violence, a very wise man resorted to preaching and nonviolence. Sadly, it was not forever. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, by James Earl Ray at the Lorraine Motel.
At the time of the assassination, I was living in Tennessee, right down the road from the Lorraine Motel. When I heard what happened, I quickly rushed to the motel and saw an ambulance speeding away. Knowing I was one of only a few white people who cared about the civil rights movement, I did all that I could to help. I even found a bullet shell that I thought came from the marksman's rifle. I handed it over to the police, and it helped to identify the assassin. Once the police were done with the bullet shell, they gave it back to me, and it helps me to remember that day.
However, because of this great tragedy, the Civil Rights Act was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. Martin Luther King Jr. did not die for nothing. America, a nation that is viewed as far from perfect on the inside. That is true. Nothing is perfect. But this country has come a far way since it was founded. From wars overseas to conflicts within our own borders. America has seen it all and emerged stronger from these events. No matter how big or small these events were or are, they have changed America for the better.